Okay, perfect. Great. All right, so I'm going to introduce Denise Newman. It's such a pleasure to introduce Denise. Her work means so much to me. Liz Waldner has used these words to describe her writing: speculative, tender, droll, fierce, attentive, intelligent, precise, aware, deft, tough, and contemplative. And I certainly agree. For me, hers is the poetry of things as they are. Denise's poetry collections are Future People, The New Make-Believe, Wild Goods, and Human Forest. Her fifth collection, The Redesignation of Paradise, is forthcoming from Kelsey Street Press. Her fifth collection, she is the translator of the novels Azorno in the Painted Room by the late Danish poet Inger Christensen, and by Naya Marie Eit, Baboon, and When Death Takes Something From You, Give It Back, Girls Book. She's also involved in video, installation, and social practice projects that explore language and poetics. And for many years, she's been collaborating with composers, providing lyrics for choral works that have been performed internationally and recorded on labels such as Other Minds Records. She lives in San Francisco and teaches at CCA. I started to love Denise's work 22 years ago when her book Human Forest came out. I hold that and all her books close to my heart as I navigate the poetic and unpoetic world that she always helps me reconcile somehow. And now, Denise. Just going to hopefully unmute Denise. There you go.
Thanks, Valerie. I'm so happy to be part of this reading to celebrate Laura's beautiful new book, and also Apogee Press, which has broken a lot of records to stay in business for as long as it has. I think the poetry publishers are really exceptional people. So I thought I'd read from my new manuscript called Reality is Occurring in the Gaps in Reality. So I started writing these poems when the insanity was getting pretty thick, and my reaction was to write in sentences and also quasi-logic puzzles. So I'll read a few of them. Oh, and in honor of Laura's book, I chose poems that have some connection to the Bible. So this first one, In Exile, Lazarus discovers poetry. Dying and staying dead, dead but not staying put, a body returning to soil is the inborn miracle of life. Lazarus was pulled from there, then propped up in his smelly grave cloths as a specimen of what Hume called a violation of natural law. Got that right. Some wanted Lazarus dead for good. No wonder he smiled only once in the 30 years of his second life. The clay steals the clay, he said, watching a man steal a pot. At what did he smile? Perhaps the inborn capacity to nail it. When we say for the birds, what are we aiming at? The hovering hawk wants a mouse in the grass. Mice are for birds, and at the same time, they're for mice. I stop my bike to watch the hawk. My watching causes a boy to notice. Watch it. Now he's hurdling a stone. His stone is for the bird. Stop, I shout at the boy, but it's for the bird, or rather for life, when nothing goes without saying. The numbers game of union busting. As Simone Weil's vitality drained onto the factory floor, she realized it wasn't oppression she was experiencing, but humiliation. That she could think so meant she was still in the countless flow, unlike numbers that go on exploding with other numbers at the same time they're plummeting, always on the back of labor, which is why exploding and plummeting have nothing to do with love or justice. You see, when numbers explode, no contrition follows. A 3 might say, I mustn't explode, then backing out of the break room, winking, making little fart sounds. Dictator school. Who made the garden where the made people are kicked out? Who made the out to go into? Blame's relationship to the ancient blasphemy explains everything. Adam saying, she did it, made of Eve a wanton thing. Thing is slang for vagina in Greek, related to German ding, followed by dong. Make a game of pinning it on the other and teach it to the children. Believing my ass and the donkey's ass are not the same is like saying my ass is self-made, is like Samson bragging. With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of an ass, I have slain 1,000 men. And this one, the title, Mene Mene Tekel Parsin, is the writing that appeared on the wall by the invisible hand in the book of Daniel. And Daniel translates for the king that it meant you've been weighed on the scales and have been found wanting, and your rule is short. So Mene Mene Tekel Parsin. Donors to We Build the Wall speak the same language as Bannon's I Steal Your Money. Nothing personal, like the English learned at the border, like the textualists' reading of the law. There's a language of walls and a language of deserts, dead languages and living languages written by the dead. Mammoths buried under the Golden Gate had to learn the language of liquidation, also written on storefronts. But who can read it? It's not that no one reads anymore. It's just that there's no way to read a fork. The finger keeps writing letters in soot on windshields and ice sheets, on waiting room faces, sky writing and dirt writing. Who can read it? The porch light shines bravely in the daylight. Following better safe, what have I missed? Saying sorry, sorry to the sacrum. Who gave you that spine to eat, little myeloma? We can be like the sun and give what we don't own, or we can plug our ears, strap ourselves to a mast and pretend we're safe. From what? According to Kafka, those ladybirds were silent as they watched Odysseus sailing by, says Martha, as we pull up to chemo. Ocean storm, desert shield. Any way you play it, we're life and death. Everywhere, old fox, sirens. And then I'll just read a couple of poems from a brand new series called Men I've Known. So I'm writing these strange little portraits of the men in my life. And they're each called Who is Anyone? A young man serves in the war to end all wars and never speaks about it, sends his 2 sons to 2 different wars. A man who doesn't speak might speak in the dark when no one's listening, mouthing sounds of gunfire to better fathom it. The man whose name means supplanter goes to work in the plant manufacturing corn products, never blows a whistle, not even when his leg gets caught in a machine and he has to cut it off himself. They give him a desk job where he sits quietly for 2 decades. His grandchild hears his wooden leg swear as he hobbles down the hallway. He turns to wink as if to affirm. The puppet can speak for its puppeteer. And this is the last poem I'll read. Who is anyone? He's an abstract talker on another plane, sorting out existence in the pith of his brain. I wasn't raised to want, he says, so I chose art like a hole in the fabric. For a time, he makes holes in his paintings. When others start to copy, he stops. I realized there was fabric in the hole. That's why I can't manage in the art world. Even nothing contains something. Contaminants like dog breath. He moves to the countryside to be more available to Sky after reading a poem by Inger Christensen in which a person looking at a cloud notices that it's regarding her as its word. He says, if lovers can't talk, there's nothing. Thank you.
Denise, wow, thank you so much. Really, really a wonderful reading. So before I introduce Elizabeth Robinson, I want to say happy birthday, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for reading on your birthday. It's a joy to introduce Elizabeth Robinson. Elizabeth is such an old and close friend, and she's done so much for so many people in all the publishing that she's done and in the reading series she has curated that I could talk on and on about all of those things. Elizabeth is a continuous connector of poets and a creator of poetry communities. Today, we're here to hear Elizabeth's poetry, and I want to focus solely on her writing. Elizabeth is so prolific that I'm not sure I can keep up with her. When I looked at her publications, I found at least 16 full-length books and at least 5 chapbooks, but that may be out of date. Her most recent books are Rumor, from Free Verse Editions, Parlor Press, and Quo Anima, Innovation and Spirituality in Contemporary Women's Poetry, from University of Akron Press, edited with Jennifer Phillips. I love poets who write prolifically and publish widely and often. That's what writers, and especially poets, should do. On the other hand, there's a wonderful quote from Morton Feldman. For 15 minutes, nobody knew anything, and that was when everything happened. The task, it seems to me, is to write and to write, but without depending on what the poet has written before or learned from writing previous books and poems. Elizabeth does that. Each book is something new and astonishing, and also full of her unique lyricism and the beauty of her language. That's why I can't wait to hear what Elizabeth is going to read today.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here. That was wonderful work, Denise. I could have listened for a long time. And I'm delighted to be reading with Cole and Laura as well. And congratulations on your book, Laura. So again, I'm trying to follow in some way the trace of Laura's work. So I'm reading some poems that I wrote in and around Anne Hutchinson, who was an early immigrant to the United States and got into trouble with some of the Puritan preachers. And I think a reductive way of putting it is that her sense of grace exceeded what they found acceptable. Also, she was a woman who was claiming the right to be a teacher, and they didn't like that. So she was banned from the Massachusetts Bay Colony and died in Jamestown, Rhode Island. Among other things, Hutchinson was a midwife, and she had many, many children. So the first piece that I'm going to read is a poem in response to the fact that, as many women did, she lost a child. She lost more than one child, but this is for one child that she lost. Beloved child, your decease is as delicate as your birth, unproven, like faith, where both starting and ending are subject to change. A hummingbird, russet and homely, moves past, eager to suck the nectar from this place between, the before and after. The little creature is an angel of our curiosity, who wants to know how deep the well of sweetness will be from this flower. Its wings hum so fast they are invisible, always, like you, midway in flight. That an angel could be so plain, I wondered. that a spirit so small, the density of waking besets us both, bird and mother, in our misplaced chronologies. I trust that you look on from your intermediate heaven. Memory is your face. I touch the unsullied air instead of it. Pain is the guardian that limits any trespass toward you. I touch its air. Lighter than that, the brown and mousy hummingbird hovers, an angel, surely with its insolence, sinning against the loss of what a self is, unappeasably buoyant. So I have two poems that are meant to be dialogues between Anne Hutchinson and John Cotton, who was initially her mentor and then became scandalized by her. Anne Hutchinson and John Cotton, how do grace and the law differ? Not by much, not in the manner of our being able to foresee what is to come. Go forward in the company of such passion, venture as I did, clinging to a vision silent inside me. I prophesy the body shouldering its burden of knowledge, always with its head bowed. The barest hesitation becomes the soul's gratification. Reverence can read in secret this posture. I hold fast. I did submit to grace. I traveled far. Many failed me, withheld forgiveness, but I did confess myself. There is no such authority as the travelers, the one lost in the wilderness, looking forward to it and forbidden its foresight. Anne Hutchinson on John Cotton. How do grace and the law differ? Not by much, he said, not in the practice of faith that foretells how we will end. In his company, others made such passage. The passion of his intelligence set sail, but rough on the coast of his word. To venture as I did, I ventured to understand the vessel on which I sailed, and hold a picture of it within me. To what source would the sojourner pray? Waves ever break over the body with its head bowed. The barest hesitation is the law's exile. None can say where this intelligence came from. The soul endures by vexing itself, and thus it is ratified. He said I was free to strike from the record the utterances I did not make, yet I make them as I made my infants inside me, seasick and clutched. Grace travels far. Its scrutiny is wanton. Many days it does not forgive, nor will the tide repeat itself exactly. Burrowed within it I was perhaps, and did confess myself the womb of another voice. There is no such figure of idolatry as birth, as the travelers, the one lost on the ocean's wilderness, looking forward and forbidden all. And I am nothing if not obsessive, so here we go again. And considering the matter again, how do grace and the law differ? How does the law differ, he said? Not in the cradle of our foreseeing. We will end. We will chart the custom of our limbs as they supplicate, stretched upward. Crossing, but rough on the coast of the body, this requires trust. But to venture to understand, as I did, faith unaligned with trust, I formed the embryo of it within me. I prayed my arms would be broken by the storm overhead, and the body bowed. Here lies the cradle of exchange. he said. The barest contraction makes birth into exile. The soul's bliss endures by vexing itself. He said I was free to midwife the utterances I did not make, yet I make them as I made my infants, fresh and white. The baby's scrutiny forsakes the womb and clamors for the breast. Burrowed within it, I gave myself suck. So he said, there is no such figure of idolatry as birth, except it be the haven of the breast. Salvation. We measure vastness by the limit of our mortal life. I would have you look, as example, at the face of the clock. It is a face even as it cherishes its own absent mouth and closed eyes. Its example we should emulate. See how it knows its cycle and yet repeats it daily, how the limit mimics the eternal. So this is salvation. With my closed eyes and shut mouth, I smell it. Here is the smell of the living upon us, dead in our clock of offense, we who endure and love our measure. My homily is my own perfume, I breathe again and again. Paradise holds its enjoyments as repetition. Time is therefore pleasure as much as medium. If my contradiction appears unholy, I have spoken my example well and timely. I think I can do two more. If my interlocutor were faith, midwiving. Can we have faith in the master who knows that the baby exists but cannot coax it from the womb? A cup cannot be enough evidence of its content. There is another eye given to see the overflow, and a hand that cradles the head as it is born from the gut of its mother, the hand gladly stained with its birthing blood. I have seen over and over one body given by another, enough to know what faith is, like the water that cannot hold shape without the curve of its cup, transparent, issuing forth from its exhausted mother, too innocent, the formless baby. I'll do two little tiny ones. The language of the new world. That we, being explorers, abash the soil's cradle. Discovering the baby as it babbles, overturned, is our lullaby. Our own darling, our own, shriven in the prattle of words, jabber, hush, coverlet, lips unearthing. Soil's mantle, we say, newborn words unmade for sense. And finally, soothsaying. I would have perished had I not believed I would see a form of God in the land of the living, the hand of the living, a script too crabbed to read, and yet the lines of God's palm spread threefold as roads on otherwise untrod wilderness, lines as fortune branched, stemming upward of my belief.
Elizabeth, thank you for that gorgeous reading today on your birthday. These are really beautiful. Thank you. So it's an honor to introduce Cole Swensen, who needs no introduction. Just gonna let someone into the room here. She's the author of 17 collections of poetry, a collection of critical essays, Noise That Stays Noise, and most recently, Art and Time, a collection of hybrid poetry, lyric essay works on innovative landscape art. Her work has won the Iowa Poetry Prize, the SF State Poetry Center Book Award, and many others. She's a translator of contemporary French poetry, prose, and art criticism. She's also won the PEN USA Award in Literary Translation. She divides her time between the US and France, and she's joining us tonight from Paris. Or today, for those of you in the US. Each of Cole's projects has fascinated me, and when I regard her extensive body of work, I'm struck again by her unique aliveness as a person and a writer, and by her intense curiosity and generosity of spirit. She engages the works of others, whether ancient or contemporary, with deepest attention and regard, and from these encounters, new and surprising art emerges. For me, her work is always inflected with a kind of serious joy and the pain and humor of being mortal. Two quotations came back to me in reflecting on Cole's work. Barbara Guest's comment for Such Rich Hour, quote, "Philosophy, suffering, and beauty come romping through this book." And the final lines of Cole's piece, Agnes Varda, Here, There, and Then Now, from her recent book, Art and Time. It's a banquet in honor of someone just outside the frame to the right. I can't wait to hear what Cole's going to share with us today.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Laura, for giving us the occasion to all come together. And thank you, Apogee, and all of your works for bringing us together too and making this happen. So I'm going to read from a series of new things. And I was struck by Denise's saying she's gone to the sentence and the notion of quasi-logic. I thought, boy, that's for some reason exactly what I've been doing. So I'll just go with them. Sun versus sun. On particularly bright days, the panes of sunlight are shattered by the sun's rays. They get all broken up. It's brittle stuff, and yet nothing is lost. You can reconstruct them like jigsaw puzzles, which is what meteorologists do when it rains. Or is it rather that plates of sunlight melted by even more sun pour down and start to wrap themselves around statues, fountains, trees, and people on the street for just a gilded second before they pass on? Or is it that a single ray strikes a window and ricochets off at just the right angle to strike you in the eye and you wince, suddenly seeing it all at once? An orange. A lot of these pieces are focused on particular objects. An orange. A former sun, a warmer form of falling on, fallen now, warmly in grass, while the one in your hand is a lonelier sun, so you hold it more closely, and a light deep inside the body wanders back. Or perhaps it's that fallen in grass, the oranges glowing in the late slanted light return to an earlier state, just a watercolor wash of sun or of scent, as when peeling an orange, the oil sprays out, covering your hands, and so you rub it in. And as you do, you notice that your mingled hands look not unlike an orange, a spherical body 6 or 7 inches in diameter and glowing. When we pocket a sun, we pocket what will come and what will go on. And thus on we go with the early anatomists thinking that the orange was made in the image of the brain. How time wanes when the mind strays. Magnolia. Though the light of it stains your hands and often even burns the skin in intricate patterns that resemble ours. Magnolias, or at least their flowers, are ours. It's their opacity and its effect upon the possibilities of flight. The thick white of where are we off to now? And how can now be pronounced without instantly collapsing time? I'm watching a magnolia do exactly that through a flower that has just grown 1 hour larger. And so I get to live just a little bit longer. Various gloves. As if the hand had once been an aerial thing, a bit like a balloon, floating off over the tops of trees, gradually becoming more and more a part of the sky, which ironically, or maybe simply inconveniently, thins its membrane, which in turn causes it to deflate, lose shape, and land on the table in my entry, not empty, but heavier than air, though lighter than life. And then there was the glove in the Proust exhibition at the Musée Carnavalet, winter 2021. White kid, so finely drawn, the fingers no fatter than cigarettes. Gaunt dumb. What could such a fragile hand ever have done? And what could it have not? I'm alone in the room, so I stroke the hand of the marble statue beside it because the glove itself is locked under glass. And yet it's still its own animal, the kid of which it was made, the calf, the suede, still grazing in their fields, gathering in their flocks, and wandering off in their five-fingered way through the mist. Dust mote. No one thinks about the shape of a dust mote. No one ever has. And so it was simply by accident that someone testing the most high-powered microscope to date just happened to focus on a mote that just happened to be floating by and was surprised to find that it just happened to have the shape of a perfect bird. So she performed the same experiment on a wide range of other motes and found that all of them were also shaped like perfect birds, though no two were alike and none of them had the same number of wings. That said, other researchers have made radically different discoveries. One found that all dust motes are unique 3D puzzles that can only be solved by an intricate series of clicking sounds, most of which, but not all, can be produced by the human tongue. The trick is to find, for each mote puzzle, the animal that can make the sounds that you, the human, cannot. For any given mote, it usually just takes one, though there was a case a few years ago that required an entire zoo. Fog. A figure in a park, exceeding its edges, its voices shredded, and there go the palaces, soft gray trees, soft-eyed leaves, and a dove-colored something or other that enfolds you nonetheless. Though considered from a different perspective, such a ghosting is the very essence of an oak. Uncanny palace, placing the figure in the park in such a way that its edges unravel those of the soft gray skies and the soft-eyed leaves, unleashing sheaves of doves resembling trees. Or is it that a single dove timed the weather into shelter and held there a flock of fog as one might hold a conviction of which one was, after all, not entirely convinced? The doorknob is turning on its own. The dog watches it from across the room. She knows that the door will swing open and that nothing will enter. It happens every evening at about this time. And she knows that the people will come back a little later and accuse each other of having once again left the door open. And good God, the dog could have gotten out. But she hasn't. She's across the room, keeping her eye on the door, as she always is at this hour. Height. In a gesture of solidarity with migrants in crisis, Ai Weiwei built a very large boat based on the principles used to construct kites in ancient China. To fly below, with travelers therein, to fly beyond what will not float, is the human heart, well hope. A kite is, of course, also a raptor, white and striking against a bright blue sky, And in fact, it's the Milvis kite that gave the name to the child's toy, though it's not a toy and it's not a child's. It's burning up in the open sun and yet remains in flight, which frightens the bird, who suddenly now also fears the sun. This is how owls are born. Speaking of owls, an owl is always early, striking some as eerie, when it's really just an airiness of the hour, as if the darker it gets, the more air there is, which makes its body more buoyant, which lets its wings beat harder. And at each beat, they beat yet more air into the dark. And thus the air in the hour continually grows until just before dawn, when it drops off sharply and settles as dew across lawns. Owls and edges. An owl cares only about edges. You can see it any evening, all disheveling, grading by degrees, and as the darkness progresses, so do the edges, and each one is a wing. It may not belong to any given thing, but the owl tends to gather them, being the night gleaner, the gatekeeper, and therefore responsible for strays. Stray wings are a problem all over the world and a danger, because if they all get together, which they seem likely to do, and soon, they'll cover the sky enough to block out the sun. And just imagine the harm that that will do, though that's not their goal. That's not what they want at all. They just want to talk, to know how you are, to ask about your life, how it's going, and to exchange a few pleasantries about the weather, for instance, and then they'll sigh and agree that it's been pretty gloomy lately. And one last one, early milestones of abstract expressionism. It was the early 1940s, and a painter exploring new avenues in abstraction was experimenting with working right up close to the canvas, her nose only a couple inches away. Completely absorbed in her work, she applied patches and streaks of color according to the rhythms of her body and the impulses of her mind. At the end of several hours, utterly exhausted and with the canvas now completely covered, she dropped her brushes into turpentine and left the studio without looking back and noticing that, though utterly abstract, the work just happened to exactly resemble a line of giant oaks along the bank of a river, with several swans on the water and a woman reading on the far shore. Thank you very much.
Cole, thank you so much for that lovely reading. These poems are so exciting and so inspiring. I had said that it was a joy to introduce Elizabeth, and it's very much a joy to introduce Laura. Laura is such a wonderful poet, such a brilliant teacher, and such a beautiful person and friend. And I could talk endlessly about her as a person before even getting to her poetry. But today is all about poetry, and it's Laura's work that I want to talk about. Laura Walker is the author of Swarm Lure, Rhymertown and Atlas, Bird Book, Follow Hoswood, Story, and Psalmbook. All of her books should be required reading, and everyone who doesn't have them should run out and buy them immediately, including the ones that weren't published by Apogee Press. But we're here today to talk about Psalmbook. And I want to say just a few words about that gorgeous text. As everyone who has read Laura's work knows, she's endlessly inventive. And each of her books is completely different from her previous work. In each of the books, though, whether in prose blocks or in phrases surrounded by space, we find Laura's lyricism, her originality, and the beauty of her language. Each of the poems in Psalmbook connects with a psalm in the King James Bible. The connections are deep rather than superficial, and though I've read Psalmbook many, many times, I find that the poems in the book are new to me whenever I return to them. The Psalms have always seemed to me to be a moment of high lyricism and deep mystery in the Bible. I was very glad that we were able to use fragments of the ancient Hebrew Psalms on the cover, certainly because they're physically beautiful, but also to remind us that behind the English text, there's something much more ancient and full of mystery. For me, Laura's poems touch that very ancient strain where religion and aesthetics are not really separate, and where an almost inarticulate wonder expresses itself in language. Laura, thank you for writing this book, and thank you for reading your poems today.
Sorry, I was waiting for Valerie to unmute me and I realized I can do that. Ed, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you to Ed and Valerie and Lisa for setting up this reading. Thanks to Ed and Alice for making this book come into the world and be a reality. I am so grateful. And thank you so much to Denise, Cole, and Elizabeth for your incredibly beautiful blurbs and your incredible readings tonight. I'm having trouble emerging from the world of dust motes and owls at the moment to come into psalmbook, but I appreciate it all very much. And thank you all for coming. As many of you have heard me describe, I have a long and complex history with the King James Version of the Bible. I grew up in the rural South in the Bible Belt. I also have a father who is here today, who is a not just an atheist, but a proselytizing atheist. And so I always felt torn between being able to enter that language and not being able to enter that language, this amazing spill of language that I hear in the King James Version of the Bible. As Ed said, I wrote these poems by choosing one psalm at a time and reading it over and over and over and over, and then writing. And as I was reading, I wasn't trying to comprehend exactly, but just swimming in the language that I found there. And so when I was writing, I could never come up quite with the metaphor of what I was doing, but it wasn't translating. It was maybe more akin to channeling or to corresponding in the Jack Spicer sense. For me, it was a different kind of listening, something I'd never done before, maybe a radical listening. The voice or voices I hear in the Psalms, and I don't claim that anyone else hears the same voice or voices, is so complex and so human to me and so full of yearning. The voice for me is torn between the very present, sometimes violent, sometimes bewildering world, and the very absent, sometimes violent, sometimes bewildering you. So there's this tearing between the world and you. Each poem corresponds to a single psalm, and sometimes I revisited them. So this is how they can look on the page. So I'm just going to read a little less than 15 minutes, which Ed and Valerie invited me to do. So I'll just jump right in. Psalm 85. Oh, and each one is titled after the psalm that I'm drawing from or responding to or channeling. Psalm 85. I remember you. Once you walked in this land and made soft thrumming sounds. Once you were outlined in paper. Psalm 102. A sparrow sworn against me. Psalm 84. I need birds and hosts, some kind of color to wait for you. We wade in pools and egrets. Everyone appears but you. I will cut myself into 1,000 pieces and give you one. I will stand in your door and ignore the tents. Psalm 100. This land is hum and sponge. We used to sing shaggy choirs. If what you make comes before you singing, are you more inclined to see it? Psalm 5. I see you lying in the dark, tracing another cliff, another toppled island on your bedroom wall. I will speak to you in the morning before the dew sends itself up and all things stir and rise. I will stir and rise. What you hate is what you hate. Their gaping mouths, internal room, tongues, a wet porch to trample and tear. They will speak, thrust the sound from their throats. Psalm 5. I stood outside your bedroom door, could hear you, something inside could hear the shifting of curtains. When we see how to go, do we go? The last one, a same thing. Someone. Do not walk with me. The sidewalks have unhinged themselves. The marbled leaves are blank as sponges, and each tends a shelter of loss and sand. Fall to the ground. The temporal and sisterly, the overly narrow importance of what you believe gathered tonight in a cold truck just off the interstate and begging for dimes. Long lines of them, smoke out the windows, something craving in the back seat. We know, and to refuse, we tell everyone, we are here, we are here. We weave and stray. Psalm 13. You have forgotten me. How long have you forgotten me? Face and face, sifting, a daily sleep. If I move, if I sing, if your face turns toward me, if I sing. Psalm 144. My fingers break when I am alone. Towers, steeple, a creek of panicking people. What is a man? A shadow in the smoking mountains. There is arrival before the storm, water full of straightened children. I will sing if you want me to. I will sing. Sons are plants and daughters are stone. Sleep in their thousands crowding the streets. And oxen broad enough to keep out the thieves. Psalm 26. I know that I am not a horse, and yet I am a horse, a net, a fish in a net. And you find us partial and confettied. When the light hits the cedars, I hear them filter and break, and the sky, they fell out of trees. I watch them return to their tents, smoldered and roving, the carpets we imagine green and serpentine against the rocks. I want you to set me down on rock. I look, and you tell me to look, and I look. Where the wall of our enemies, daisy chains and flapping pennants, and we all believe we live in the land of the living. Psalm 2. A veined thing, rage. Let us break their hands and hobble ourselves toward water. We are spore and pheasant. We are reeved and speaking. I will set you, a pot broken at the wheel, kindling. Psalm 101. When I close my eyes, I hear 2 birds and 3 underground things. Nothing perfect. When you look at us, do not look toward our feet or hands. We swell and jut, we unravel just before snow. I go nicked and wild. I look toward ceilings and dream of falling. Nothing clings to me. Nothing sings to me. Psalm 1. Would you choose to sift away like a table book disease? Would you bloom along a street, dust and hooks? What choice you have waits above the skyline and a pale blue chair. Psalm 15. Where is your home? He bites and bites. He is not my neighbor. He is hurt and does not fall. He leaves money on my doorstep. He questions the innocent. He is innocent. He does all these things. Psalm 100. The land humming. Spikes and cornrows. It sings blackbirds and berry lines. It sings darkness and thrush. Pulls its mouth round the smallest pebble. Performs itself in lathing and glass. Make a good noise, all the lands, and us make a good noise. Psalm 24. I am looking for you. Our hands we've kept clean. We wrap them in swaddling and cold flannel. We tip our cups with feet or long sticks. We sweep with brooms in our mouths. The gates look up. The doors look up. Selah. Psalm 85. Once we were favored, sown and resown. Once you lit lamps for our return and worked our names into the hem of your blankets. Once you fell in the grass. If I close my eyes, you will come. If I kiss their laughing heads, you will come. Something will break in front of you, ripe and unrepentant. Its steps, a crush and spire. Psalm 6. Can you hear me? My bones are soft, unsaved and wet. At night they are wet, supple and waxed, ashamed of themselves. Psalm 141. By now, perhaps you are tired of me. You unwrap my hands from your hands. You swallow my ears and eyes and the bird of my mouth and the curved bone's edge. And I will burn for you the smell of childhood and wax, the darkling mud just before light. I will refuse their small snacks, sweet stones of their words. Our bones are scattered, he said, asking me, but the forest is already cut. We have swallowed our lines. I am hunted. He hunts. He is good with snares, with his hands, his nets and hands, and you will not stay. Psalm 3. The insects have returned. Thick, black, wobbly lines, stove to cabinet to floor. When I sleep, I dream the 10,000 dreams, circle of cheekbone and teeth. I am not afraid of the finer bones of the human head, nor the dentist's troubadour drill, faces, broken, tiles. Psalm 99. I see you there, or think I do, perched on a fence with your pants leg rolled up, holding a flag or an apple, milk-creased creature against your thigh. Your name is a plucked thing in my mouth, a footstool, a cloudy invention. They are angry. Psalm 5. Listen, I will talk to you in the morning by the washing machine, open window and salt and shallow breezes. What you hate is what you hate. We are looking for a same thing. Psalm 6. Something rising to the surface. My bones bend while I sleep. I remember you. And my couch is wet and my teeth are swelling and the sounds I make are not sounds at all. If I say you hear me, do you hear me? partial, riven. Psalm 83. Speak. I can see the ones who hate you, hidden in springs and lakes, the mist which rises above the gloaming wet. Speak. They splash and swim, they do not invite me. They swim and wet, they do not invite me. Their faces are troubled over like a fire that leaps from treetop to treetop while the birds lie smoothed and tender. Your name is the name that they speak. Psalm 30. I will not ask you. I am not a pit or a swell. My feet are untangled and rhymed. My land is welt and bone. If I could praise you for remembering, I would. You were angry and then you weren't. When you hid, I heard dusk rustling. The dusk I press and snow. Psalm 84. I don't mean to speak this way. You are a clatter and a light. Your songs are the best songs. Your reason is the best reason. Sparrows and swallows will nest in you. I would trade 1,000 days for you. I would stand in your door and look away from the tents. Psalm 9. There is no city still standing, even as it is standing. The buildings are ghosts of themselves, the memorials, ghosts of memorials, a perpetual. Come inside, I will give you water and fruit. I will free your foot from this net. There is no net. You did not make nets, said and unsaid, ghosts in the pitted air. Be but men, Salah. Psalm 2. We are imagined. There are those who believe they join themselves and that power is a thing you can make. Light to light. If you are a little bit angry. Psalm 82. You are not among us. Your shoulders are rounded and high, and yet the fatherless go missing. You have misjudged. And for how long? The turn of the sea is crooked and spare, the fish fly confused on their course. I have told them they are gods. I have told them they are children, corn, small symptoms of disease. They don't understand. Make them understand. Everyone dies. It isn't that. Braid us now. Psalm 142. Sound poured round our heads like trouble or gravel. Psalm 85. I remember you. Psalm 84. Selah. A single rapacious day, light, filtered and wide. Birds flit in and out and in. A blanket, a roof. You.
Laura, thank you so much. Thank you to all of the readers. I just want to be honest and say something personal. I found this reading really moving. And it seems like you all conspired, that somehow this all seemed to work together very beautifully, in spite of the fact that the work is very, very different, very diverse. Thank you to all the readers. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who was here. I've enjoyed this reading enormously. As I said, I was very moved by it. And I hope that some of you all feel the same way that I do.
Yeah, and now I want to invite everyone to unmute yourselves. So you can do that by just going down to that lower left and unmuting yourself so we can celebrate everyone all together.
Bravo.
And again, thank you, Laura, for this beautiful book.